Welcome back to the RTS Masterminds podcast. I'm Balint Martin, formerly designer on Total War Warhammer 2 and 3, Halo Wars 2, Age of Mythology Extended Edition, and now lead designer on Project Minerva.
Hi, I'm Brandon Castiel. I'm the lead game designer of Tempest Rising and Warpaws, and I've done a lot of other consulting, and I run a blog, Wayward Strategy, that I update sporadically.
Nice. Dude, I
So
almost just said the real name of the game, like, hence the long pause. I'm like,
Whoops.
oh, damn, we have to stop recording.
Time to start over.
Let's
Oh,
talk
man.
about Stormgate today. So
I
that was
know,
just revealed.
after a year of sizzle, we finally get to see some of their steak, right?
Yes. Do you want to talk about that whole sizzle topic? We briefly chatted about this on Discord, but I thought it would be actually a great opener to this. So, to all that aren't aware, Stormgate is made by Frost Giant Studios. They are the people that used to be behind StarCraft 2 and Warcraft 3, at least the core crew that was forming the company is actually those people. And yeah, they basically just came out that they're gonna make the next big RTS. They got funding for it, and we didn't really hear a whole lot from them. Eventually, they started releasing a little bit of teasing. They put out a cinematic trailer, revealed that the name is Stormgate, and started talking about it. So how do you feel about all that?
So Stormgate first announced about a year ago, I think, like specifically, like they showed the trailer and the name and all that stuff about a year ago. And they've kind of started doing like the podcast circuit and talking to I guess not podcasts per se, but like the some of the big online YouTube shows for RTS and specifically StarCraft, talking about all the stuff they were planning on doing. And what we were talking about on Discord is that there's a really big lead time, or there has been a really big lead time between them saying this is what we're doing and us actually getting to see what they're doing. And as you know, RTS commentators and creators, I think for me anyway, I don't want to speak for you, but it was very frustrating to hear, you know, these are all the cool things we're going to do. These are a bunch of people reacting to stuff that they've seen, and oh, this is really cool. This is, you know, trust me, I've seen this. It's cool. Saying, you know, I want to see it and decide if I think it's cool or not. And we finally get to see it, and we can talk about, you know, what they've actually done. But that lead time for me has been very frustrating because it's and that's why in the intro I said, you know, if it's felt like all sizzle and no steak, you know, I don't want to smell what you're cooking for a year. Just give it to me and let me sample it. We finally got that sample in front of us.
Yes, which I'm personally very happy about that we did. So like the 1 year lead up, I'm actually kind of okay with. I wouldn't say I'm a fan. I'd rather have a faster cadence of information with gameplay being rather front loaded. But the part I got uncomfortable with, as you just said, was the reactions to reactions without gameplay. That's the kind of stuff that I'd rather not even know about.
So from my perspective, first off, I fully agree. I don't like having a bunch of people say, I played it, it's really good, get excited about it. I don't like that. I don't like that style of marketing. But I think the way I have been approaching it is, I'm pretty sure they kind of had to do this. They had to get investor funding.
Yes.
It behooved them to get people talking about the game, and clearly that's worked. They have a pretty big subreddit. I don't know about their Discord or anything, but they seem to have
a Discord.
There's
like a fan Discord, a bunch. So that isn't yet built up apparently. But okay, with the beta soon coming out, I assume that's going to change.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure they're gonna have a big content push around the release of their beta,
which is a month from when we're recording, somewhere in July 2023. Very much looking forward to it. Obviously, I've signed up.
Yeah, I think I signed up to be a part of that. Like as soon as the signups opened, I think we about crashed their site when they first did their
True.
beta signups.
Very true.
But no, I mean it's been remarkably successful for them. Even before their announce or before their actual gameplay reveal, they broke the top 100 most wishlisted games on Steam, which is, you know, without showing anything substantial, that's a pretty big feat. I mean, they had shown some concept art and some screenshots, and for Valentine's Day they did a little GIF. And in the previous week, up to their reveal, they shared some videos with like content creators and had them share them, and that's been a good kind of build up. I don't mind that. I don't mind saying, oh, here's a unit, here's a little clip, here's, you know, some stuff to kind of whet your appetite. But that year of saying, you know, I saw it and you can't, and it's really cool, trust me, that was kind of frustrating. But again, I think they kind of had to do that, and while parts of it didn't sit well with me, I think overall it seems to have worked for them. So
I have to say though, they actually don't have all that many views on like the YouTube trailers. Do you have any concern that this is not going to be as far-reaching of a game as perhaps Frost Giant would hope, or do you think like the actual release trailers will be the ones that really get things going with the free-to-play monetization model also constantly trickling in the players? How will this work out?
yeah, so I think this is not the ending of anything for them. This is the beginning of a lot of real work for them,
Mhm.
right? So, you know, they had like a big Washington Post article. They've had a cover of PC Gamer, and that was all before they revealed anything. So I think from here, it's going to be easier for them to get big interviews and get big coverage from kind of more mainstream outlets. So I think they have a decent chance of continuing to increase their mind share from here as they show more stuff, and as they, you know, are able to show behind the curtain more. So I think from here they have more opportunity than they've ever had, and they did pretty well, honestly, with what they've with what little shit they showed before, you know, earlier this week or last week or whenever it
Yeah,
was. I
the
have no
reveal
concept of time
was
anymore.
the reveal itself was, I think, overall showing some pretty decent gameplay. So we're sort of looking at something between StarCraft 2 and Warcraft 3, very much on the side of Warcraft 3's pacing, but armies being in between the two in terms of size. And obviously, you've got the sci-fi universe for the setting with an economy like Warcraft 3's. It's a pretty interesting mix of things actually around that front. Do you think it's similar to Blizzard games in a good way, or is it too similar?
That is a big and tough question. And I think the caveat we have to put in front of ourselves right now is that it's kind of early to definitively say that. Right now, I think it might seem a little too similar, but we haven't seen a lot of the stuff that they're working on yet. So how I've been kind of personally viewing it is it's like 40% Warcraft, 40% StarCraft, actually kind of 10% Age of Empire, not Age of Empires, good Lord, wayward. Kind of like 10% like Red Alert 2. And I want to talk about that briefly. And then kind of 10% their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And my guess is, my hope anyway, and expectation is that the more we see, that percentage of their own thing is going to increase. But right now, yeah, it's very, very obvious that they're kind of trying to make something that feels both like Warcraft 3 and like StarCraft 2. But yeah, I saw some surprising stuff that reminded me of Red Alert 2 that I found kind of charming. Honestly, I think one of my favorite reveals was a unit called the Scout, and it's supposed to be an acronym. I don't remember what it's supposed to stand for, but it's basically like a Blizzardified version of the dogs from Red Alert 2.
Yes.
And I say Blizzardified because in Red Alert 2, they instantly killed when they attacked infantry, they instantly killed them. And that doesn't happen in this game. But I actually thought that was really clever and charming. And as someone who who kind of likes that style of game, I was really happy to see that. Also, it's I've written about scouting, and one thing I really like that Age of Empires does is they give you those dedicated scout units. I think that's a lot more intuitive than kind of the worker system that Blizzard traditionally has implemented. The other Red Alert thing, and they didn't really call this out, and that makes sense because resources aren't like big sexy things to talk about. But the other thing that interested me was their secondary resource. It's called Therium, and it kind of looks a little bit like Tiberium from the
It kind
Command
of
and Conquer
does,
games,
doesn't it?
but it works more like ore from Red Alert 2, which is why I reference Red Alert 2 specifically. So it starts out in a little field on the map and it expands over time. We don't see that it has any gameplay effect or has any we have no indication that it does something like Tiberium where it damages infantry that cross it. But over time the field spreads and then enriches, so you have the idea of sitting it there and leaving it and being able to have it gain value over time, which is something that is you don't see in any other Blizzard game.
No, you really don't. It's something that's also common in the Age series, where you have all these herdable animals that you collect and they fatten over time, so you can save them for later, use the other sources of food first, and then transition yourself over before you make your farms then. So that is totally viable there. And here, I suppose it has to do a little bit with encouraging expansion bases so that you get those first. You don't fully saturate all your resources, but rather spread out a little bit so that you keep the diminishing returns of worker income at bay. And rather you spread out, you claim the map and you spread out the conflict, which makes for better viewing experience for sure. I'm not sure if everybody's into that for playing. A lot of people like the turtle, but competitively speaking, it's good for the game, yes.
Well, so it's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart because in Tempest Rising, our resource also kind of works like that. And I've talked about this about 2 months ago. We released a kind of a PvP like demonstration video where I talked a little bit about how Tempest works. And it's a plant that also grows and enriches over time. And it's the primary resource, and the fields are quite large as they are in kind of classic Command and Conquer games, as opposed to the smaller fields that you saw in like Command and Conquer 3, where they were these fixed size circles. But and I'm not going to make the whole thing about my game, I promise. But
we gotta do an episode though.
I'd love to at some point, yeah. Get some advertising for my own thing.
Hell yeah.
But yeah, so their stated reasoning for Therium is very similar to one of the things I was trying to do with Tempest, where you're kind of trying to manage how fast you harvest it. With Tempest, one of the things we're trying to do is encourage what I call maintenance harvesting. So you put enough harvesters on the field to be able to continually gain resources without depleting the whole field. With Tempest, it grows such that being close to an existing pod helps the other pods grow faster. So if you denude the whole field, if you harvest the whole field down to the core, it takes a very, very long time to grow back. But if you do this maintenance harvesting, you can kind of keep this indefinite source of income in your base. So I'm trying to encourage players to like spread around the map and maintenance harvest several fields as opposed to permanently harvesting one. And it gets deeper than that for me, and I think for them too, because they've implied that there are other ways to gain Therium. They said something about underground seams of it, or like sealed, like you have to like destroy it and it pops open or something. So they have a couple of different things they're doing with, they seem to be trying to do with Therium that I think are potentially interesting.
Yeah, man. I mean, they have these creeping systems, right? And I'm sure it will come into play in that form as well, that certain caches of resources will be guarded by creeps that you'll then have to go out and defeat. So they want more than just traditional map control of, oh, I'm sitting my army down at your future base. You can't come over here until you beat my army. And so keeping vision and all that stuff. So it goes into creeping now in Stormgate, just like in Warcraft, but not for a hero XP reward. Although we'll get to that when we talk about team games. But for 1v1, it's about resources and buffs. Do you think that this has some good implications for a StarCraft Warcraft mix 1v1 game?
So I really like the idea of creeping, especially creeps that come back. That was one of my biggest frustrations with Warcraft 3. And I think they might have said something similar themselves, where creeping is like a phase that goes away in the game. And the idea of continually being able to come back to these creep camps to get the buff again. And they did, for people who might not have heard, they did say that some of the creep camps would contain kind of like a League of Legends or Dota style buff that you can like it sounds like you can just go claim it and you'd be able to like leave it undefended and have someone come and steal the buff from you and get it as well. So you might want to like protect it.
Yeah, exactly. MOBAs have this figured out, man. it's RTSs
Well,
that just weren't backporting this feature for the longest time, and I have some discarded game concepts with actually the very similar sort of systems, and I think really all of us in this space are coming to the same conclusion on this front. Be very surprised if that's not the case.
It's going to be interesting because one of the easiest ways to turn off your kind of average RTS fan, at least the one that feels like they need to comment on Reddit and Discord, is to make something feel like a MOBA. Like it's a really kind of visceral reaction. We saw that with Dawn of War 3, where they did stuff like divide some of the maps into lanes, and people are saying, "Oh, it's just a MOBA." Now, their win condition was kind of similar to what you do in a MOBA, but yeah, it remains to be seen as to what side of the line that is on for players. For me, I love the idea of being able to push out there on the map and have these interactive things going on the map. That's one thing I love about like Relics games, like Company of Heroes, where you have these points that you're constantly fighting over, and it keeps the focus on at least partially on the map as opposed to the other player. And I think that will be useful and interesting. But I have a little bit of a concern that some players are going to say, well, this is just a MOBA and I want to play an RTS and not a MOBA. And partially because I've seen people say things like that about other RTS systems, even in some cases, things that don't feel very MOBA-ish to me.
Yeah,
so
I think there's a line there for sure. Like you suggest that some features of MOBAs are perhaps much more acceptable to an RTS player. So, for example, heroes are a contentious topic. So, what does Frost Giant do? They have heroes and they don't have heroes. Kind of appeal to both sides of the argument. And I think with your example regarding Dawn of War 3, the problem really was that they took the worst part of MOBAs and put it in a game that's least suitable to accept it, to receive that. And yeah, I mean, lanifying maps essentially means that you are locked into very linear paths that you can't deviate from, and thus you can't surprise your opponent in a game about Wits. That doesn't work. You might as well not have an RTS, right?
I don't want to make the whole conversation about Dawn of War 3. That always happens when Dawn of War 3 comes up, is it kind of eats the whole conversation. But yeah, so some of the map design was problematic in Dawn of War 3, and one of the big things was once you started capturing some of the mid-map stuff, you got both kind of concrete resource advantages, and also you had these like victory point or lane advantages. So you didn't have that feeling of like, I'm giving up something to do this. It was just win more sort of systems that they set up. And part of that was due to the map design, but there were better and worse maps in Dawn of War 3. And I think the map design was one complaint, but also the victory condition where you had to defeat it was the shields and then the turrets and then the core. I think that kind of turned.
That's probably the worst aspect, because you can't just skip one and go for the next thing. Even if you still really want to force that victory condition, not having a choice as to which one to take is just very anti-decision making. And I think Frost Giant is very much on the opposite side of that kind of game design where they really want the player to be in control of what kind of decisions get to be made. So for example, they give you now all these choices of fast expanding teching, rushing, or just trying to control the map and take creeps, or just playing completely standard safe macro, kind of defending at home, hard turtling. They create all these paths for the player to take, and all of them are supposed to be at least somewhat valid in given each situation, right?
Also, I want to keep talking about map design because I think Stormgate has some really interesting things that they're doing.
Okay.
But I kind of want to also jump back 10 minutes in our conversation because we started talking about whether we thought that Stormgate was too close to existing Blizzard IPs, and then we kind of did a little rabbit trail around it.
Sure.
So
let's go back to that.
Going back to that real quick. I have seen some concerns about how the Vanguard faction, that's what the humans are called. Before we were calling them the Human Resistance, I think, but now they officially are called the Vanguard. There were some concerns about them maybe being a little too StarCrafty, and I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, because myself and my Discord have had a lot of conversations about that, and we're a pretty small corner of the RTS space, but I think it's kind of interesting because we've had some conversations where people have said, oh, you know, some of this might be incidental, some of this might be kind of like a nudge and a wink sort of thing, but then it comes out, and one of the units, the EXO in Stormgate, is basically a Terran Marine,
basically
down to the stem. I actually think that they have a really interesting spin on the stem mechanic. We didn't get to see it in action, but they released a one pager on all the different units, and it describes the ability. And how their ability works is they get a speed boost, but if they attack, it deals double damage or attacks twice, and then the speed boost goes away. So they could use that to get away from things, to get up to things, or to do damage. But it's not like a Marine where they just get this consistent DPS boost plus a speed boost at the same time. They kind of have to choose. And it doesn't say the duration of the speed boost, but there may be an option to both maneuver and attack, but not continually do so at the same time. So I think that it's an interesting spin on the ability, but functionally the thing really feels and looks like a Terran Marine, right?
It's still STEM, it's still a Marine, right? in a way, with a twist. And I guess the dogs are kind of like Zerglings when they showed that little engagement where the doggos wrapped around the exos. That totally looked to me like I'm playing ZVT.
That felt a lot like that interaction. And then the Lancer kind of also feels like a Zealot.
Yes.
He doesn't seem to have a charge, but he feels kind of like the same sort of thing where he's got a blade and he's getting up close to things.
Yeah, and he's tanky, so you know it's taking aspects of
what it actually
StarCraft races and putting it into one, but also taking aspects of Warcraft tech trees and putting that in there. So like Warcraft humans with their workers, they get to have the militia, right? And the Bobs, the workers of the Human Resistance, they also get that. Sorry, Vanguard.
I think that's awesome. Honestly, I loved seeing that, with the ability to boost your workers to be able to use them as a defense. Now, based on what we saw in the clip, and this is super early, this is like alpha, pre-alpha for them still, and possibly an old build, who knows. It seems like it didn't do very much, and it might be interesting to see if they buffed it a little bit. But I mean, it's really, really early to talk about a lot of that. But I loved the idea. I love seeing that, and being able to use the workers as a part of your defense, like Monk did in the gameplay footage. I loved seeing that. That was one of my favorite things.
They seem to get
they showed off.
Tanky in the process. That's where,
it definitely
most of the buff seems to go.
It definitely did seem to make them survive a lot longer. But I think without those two Vulcans coming out in that clip, it wouldn't have done very much. It just made their defeat slightly longer.
Yeah, now the Vulcans are not StarCrafty. I'll say that. That's probably their 10% Frost Giant take on RTS. And same deal with the natural walling, right? Where you have the trees that can be pathted through by the infantry, but these big mechs, they're too thick. They can't they can't do that. They'll need their upgrade to smash through, which is
That
really cool.
that's another thing I really liked seeing as well, where they had this really nuanced terrain system where it kind of reminded me of I don't know if you played Emperor Battle for Dune, but I think Dune 2000 might have also had this as well. They had something called infantry rocks, where infantry could be crushed in those games, but you could walk them onto certain terrain types that vehicles couldn't go into, and then they were safe from being crushed. It felt like that sort of thing. So I'm sorry, my daughter in the background.
Oh, good.
She's yelling for me. I don't know.
Soon
She's
TM.
yeah, eventually. But anyway, the infantry, the trees kind of reminded me of that, where infantry can pass through them but vehicles can't. But they also give you lots of methods to, like, the Vulcan is the first vehicle that came out in that match, and it was able to crush those trees with its dash ability. Now, I don't think it came out of the factory with the dash ability. They implied that there's unit upgrades,
Yes,
kind of like
it's an
Warcraft
upgrade.
3. So it seemed like that's an upgrade. But if your first vehicle is able to get an ability to let it break down those trees, that means that it's kind of like what the Protoss force field ended up being, right? Well, eventually the Protoss force field in StarCraft 2 started out being this really game warping thing where they kind of had to balance the whole Protoss faction around it. But eventually they got systems where things could crush those force fields and there was more counterplay. And this feels like that to me, where you can kind of use infantry to dodge in and out of the rocks with in the very early game, but then kind of the early to mid game, you get these fairly early things that are able to maneuver around those trees and interact with them. So I think that shows that there's a really big possibility space around that kind of one terrain system they showed off, even with the existing units. And they only showed us like 4 or 5 units or something. That gives a lot of possibility space around even the limited roster they showed us so far.
Yeah, and tier 3, they didn't show tier 3, so there's that to consider. We'll see what happens with that. Stay tuned in the space.
I'm interested to see what happens with tier 3, but what I'm saying is I'm happy that at tier 1 and tier 2 already they have systems to kind of manipulate this.
Oh yeah,
this terrain,
and that's a fair amount of diversity. Like, you also have the I forgot the name of the unit, the siege tank like thing. Do you remember?
It's called the Atlas.
Atlas, yes.
Yeah, that was one of the bigger letdowns for me, honestly. And I'm sure it's not a huge deal for them to either increase the damage or the shot speed, but those shots were very slow and it would seem to be very easy to dodge them. And then even when they hit, they didn't seem to do very much. I think it's a great concept and kind of like a fun way to go halfway between the siege tank and the Protoss disruptor sort of thing. But I liked the idea of it. I don't feel like it showed very well in the footage. And that's not saying it's a bad unit. I'm just saying that at this stage of their development, it didn't show as well as I think they would have wanted it to.
They do have this whole design direction around, let's not make splash damage so lethal as to have it delete entire armies when you look away for 2 seconds to place some buildings, right? They don't want that, but they still want there to be some significant microplay to it. I think they've gone way too far on the direction of let's not have lethal AoE.
Yeah, and
it didn't seem threatening.
No, it really didn't seem threatening, and that's the big thing. I think either it needs to do more damage or the shot needs to hit faster. But these are all really simple changes, and I'm sure they're aware of it. And I'm sure they probably wish it would have showed better when they showed it off. For all we know, they just had an arbitrary cutoff point, and they were like, we didn't get to
make the video
get where we wanted. Yeah, exactly.
That kind of stuff happens a lot, so I'm not going to be too harsh about this. I'm sure many others have said this before already. In fact,
and that's why I wanted
that from others already. So
that's why I wanted to mention it, because I feel like kind of our unique angle, our niche on this is that we're doing this from a game designer perspective, kind of from the inside. And I know there were some things, when Fred and I did our PvP thing for Tempest, and it was like, oh, I kind of wish we would have had some of that other stuff working right behind the scenes. And we were able to cut some of that out.
But, also, even if you do your absolute best, when people really start hammering your game, as a game designer, you're never going to think of everything that a player is going to do. And I'm not saying that that happens in a 1-to-1 ratio, but when you throw 100,000 people at the game and they together accumulate entire lifetimes of playtime, that's when you really start seeing the crazy strategies come up, and you find the exploits and all that stuff that you never have time to test as a designer. Like, you're mostly just looking for the intended way. Your QA is trying to break it a little bit, and you kind of hope for the best, to be honest, when you release.
I
But people will break your thing, and you'll have to
yeah,
patch it, and that's when it gets good, when you have a good cadence of patches.
mhm. I actually saw, I think it was this morning on Reddit. Someone said something like, if you put in 10,000 hours of QA, which is a lot, and 100 and sorry, if you put in 100,000 hours of QA and then 100,000 people buy your game, they will sort of kind of, do that 100,000 hours in the first hour they spend playing the game. Now, it's obviously it's not a 1-to-1 because players aren't QA and they're looking for different things, but it kind of puts it into perspective that, like,
It's just
you could put a tremendous amount of work into fixing something up, but then 500,000 people touch your thing and they're going to find stuff that you missed, and they're going to find rough edges that you didn't sand down. So there's definitely that sort of truth that you can only do so much before it hits that kind of mass market.
I
But
think if
yeah,
we
so anyway,
wanna,
I think the Atlas has potential. And I'm interested to see where they go with it. Personally, I think it's ugly. I don't like it very much. I think they might have updated the model since they recorded that video, because some of the stuff they were showing on Twitter kind of shows the legs, and I don't know if that's player color or not, but the leg color seems to have changed, maybe the size and shape of the legs, but I don't know. I don't find it very attractive as a unit.
yes, do we want to talk about graphics as our last topic for today, as we're kind of running short on time, so we kind of gotta
Yes, this
nail
is
down
my
what the
fault.
last
This is
thing will
this
be?
is this is my fault, everybody. I'm limited on time today, so
No
I have
worries,
to
we'll do
apologize to.
probably an episode 2. I think there's plenty
Yeah,
of
maybe
topics
there's.
left to discuss, like heroes, like going further on map design, because we really haven't gotten around to it. We can talk about the different game modes. We can talk
So
about
really quick,
competitive.
what I want to talk about, and I've said this several times, but my absolute favorite thing that I saw in the footage was the Medtech. I am a huge sucker for. I love the Warcraft 2 style tier 2 support caster, and the Medtech is that. Now, I think Monk in an interview and also possibly in some other stuff that was released alongside the footage. It has 3 abilities. It can heal and provide armor, like Inner Fire. It has an ability that will heal an ally or damage an enemy over time, and then it kind of has like a dispel sort of ability where it can remove debuffs from allies and buffs from enemies, or maybe it's vice versa. It's something like that though. And I love that sort of thing. I think it's adorable. I didn't really like it when I first saw it, but from a game perspective, like looking at it from above, I think it's a great model. But yeah, I can't wait to. That's the number one thing I want to be able to play with in the game is the Medtech so far. I love that sort of unit, and I think it's a really neat idea. So I just wanted to say that real quick.
No, that's good. Let's keep talking about units, actually. I think that's the cleanest outro to this, really. So I also like that, actually, that you have this infantry-based healing option to keep your basic army going, and so that you don't get rolled over by tech immediately as soon as the Vulcan numbers go up. We've certainly seen, at least from the setup that they've done in the videos, that infantry is very numerous, but we'll have to see in the actual game how much that stands up. Now, there's 2 more units that were showcased. One of them is the Dropship. I actually forgot the exact name, but it's basically a medevac, right? It can
So
pick up, it can heal.
it's not a medevac. It can't heal.
I'm
It's
pretty sure I've
basically
seen it heal.
no, they made it clear that all it is a dropship. It is just a dropship.
Okay.
So I think the healing what might have been the medtechs nearby.
Huh.
But yeah, I'm actually looking right now at a comment on Discord, and I trust the person pretty well.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Sorry,
He's
my
one of
mistake.
No, it's fine. I think a lot of people assume that, but the ability that it has though is actually really interesting. It has an ability that will make it automatically retreat to the factory that produced it, or I guess the nearest air factory. So kind of like Company of Heroes,
Hmm.
you push the button, it gets a speed boost, it turns around. You can't control it, but it goes right back to the nearest air factory or the factory
Oh,
that produced
that's
it. I
dangerous
forget
for
now exactly what it was.
intercepts. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Like you'd be able to predict retreat paths and be able to put things on the way, and it's going to have a speed boost. Um, but yeah, it feels a lot more like the warp prism or even the traditional dropship,
Yeah,
where
it's got such a long pickup range. Oh my
it really
goodness.
seems to. Yeah, it's like what is it, like 4 unit lengths or something?
Something
It's
like
pretty
that. It was
pretty
pretty
generous.
bonkers. Which does make for fun gameplay, and there's the thing that really comes up that the Atlas, that was the unit, right?
Yeah, the
The
artillery siege tank
artillery.
guy.
Yeah, so even that can be picked up even when deployed. So a little bit of a flashback for you early Legacy of the Void players. you got the siege tank pickups when they were deployed. It shouldn't be as powerful, of course, considering that the Atlas itself is as damage heavy. But it sure makes for some good micro, and they've showcased like pickup micro versus pickup micro. The dropship
Mm-hmm.
itself seems fairly survivable. So I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of micro there will be with that. And then there lastly was an air unit as well that seemed to have a support role, and it wasn't on the fact sheet. What's
I
going
know, and
on?
I want to know about it too because, like I said, I'm a big sucker for spellcasters, and it's clearly some sort of spellcaster. To me, it looks kind of like a mix between the science vessel and the vulture, not the vulture, the raven. Um, so I don't know. I want to know what it does. It seems to have some sort of weak attack, which makes me think High Templar
Hmm.
sort of thing, where they were adding attacks to some of those casters to keep them at range a little better. But yeah, as far as I know, I've been watching some videos. I hadn't seen it do anything yet. It's implied that it might be a detector because of that eyeball thing on top.
Oh yeah,
Um,
good point.
but yeah, I don't know. Somebody posted the name of it, and I can't find it. It's Sky something, I think, or Wind Stride or something like that. I don't know. It's something like that. Um, I'm sure we'll have people in the comments telling us what the name is and probably what it does for all I know. But like you said, it's not on the fact sheet that they provided. So that's still a bit of a mystery, but I know it's a spellcaster and I want to know what it does. But yeah, definitely one of the high points to me is the micro potential they already showed off with, like you said, the scouts basically being like Zerglings.
Hmm.
One thing I don't think I said yet, and forgive me if I already did, the Lancer and the Exo. The Exo is the Marine guy. That does feel a little bit like a zealot and a Marine, but it also feels like a footman and a dwarven rifleman from Warcraft 3. It's kind of got that same sort of like bulky.
Yes.
And I think the Lancer is implied as having some sort of like defensive ability as well. I think the fact sheet said something about him shrugging off damage with an upgrade. So I don't know. So I like that you kind of have a little bit of Warcraft and a little bit of Starcraft in it. But I do want to play something that's not Warcraft and Starcraft. And I really want to see with future updates more things that make Stormgate feel like Stormgate, as opposed to feeling like something that's kind of Starcraft and kind of Warcraft. I wanted to
Yeah, the
try to feel more
nostalgia
like
is good,
its
but
own thing.
as a competitive player that keeps jumping around in these different RTSs, actually the learning curve is very easy for someone like myself to just quickly pick things up, and you already transfer all the fundamentals. Sure, the deep strategies are another story, and if you go to an old game, it's hard. But when you go to a new game, and you kind of already know all the fundamentals. I don't know. I kind of wish the new RTSs challenge you mechanically in a different format, and that would be great if Frost Giant could come up with with a unique piece of theirs that's only Stormgates, and it's not just the raw Blizzard DNA. But maybe that's not their objective. Like they very much said that they are going to respect that Blizzard DNA and make a spiritual successor. So I think that might not be happening in fact, and it will be just that comfy, familiar zone to be in.
Okay, so I think I'm about out of time right now.
All good, all good. So we're gonna wrap up here, and we're gonna at some point do a second episode, and we'll super quickly just suggest everybody to make sure to subscribe to our YouTube because we're starting to grow that a little bit, and we also have a Patreon if you want to support our project directly with ad-free listening as well as access to our Discord as well as Q&As. But because we don't have that many patrons yet, how about in the YouTube comment section, we'll take some comments and do a Q&A episode in the future. Maybe we'll even do a separate community post for that. So we'll see you there.
Awesome. Sounds great. It was great talking with you and looking forward to doing part 2 in the near future.
We'll be back.